talk about something she's crazy passionate about, glaciers. Dr. Jackson earned a doctorate from the University of Oregon in geography and glaciology, where she examined how climate change transformed people and glacier communities in Iceland. She is an Arctic expert at National Geographic Society, received 3 Fulbright scholarships, is a TED Fellow, and was a Peace Corps volunteer in Zambia. She's worked for over a decade in Arctic chronicling climate change in communities, guiding backcountry trips, and exploring glacial systems. She is the author of 2 books, While Glaciers Slept and The Secret Lives of Glaciers. I appreciate the insight she has to offer and look forward to the knowledge that she has to share today. I'm excited to introduce M. Jackson.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Can everyone hear me? We're doing okay with that? Thank you all so much for coming out and listening to what I have to say about this thing that I, direct quote, am crazy excited about. Glaciers. Hopefully you learn a lot in the next few minutes as we're all together. But before I get started, I want to tell you how meaningful it is for me to be standing here. My whole career as a National Geographic expert, all the books I've written, all the amazing places I've gone, I got to do all of that because my career actually started here in Putney, Vermont. Years and years ago, I really wanted to work for the National Geographic Society, and so I emailed and told them that. And then I emailed again and again and again, never got any responses until finally, I think after about the 800th email, somebody said, stop emailing, but also have you looked at National Geographic student expeditions? And I'd never even heard of that. And so I Googled it, and then I said, oh, this sounds like an amazing job. And National Geographic Student Expeditions is a travel organization that's run here in Putney, Vermont through Putney Student Travel. And they gave me my first job. And not only did they give me my first job, they introduced me to people I had never dreamed I'd meet. They introduced me to places I'd never dreamed that I would go. And they introduced me to all sorts of possible. So when I was invited to come speak here, I said yes, because this is where, for me, my career began. And so, in a way, it's a little bit like coming home. So thanks for coming home with me today. So I'm a bit of a storyteller. So I thought we would just start with a story, right? So several years ago, I was doing field work on the south coast of Iceland. And one day, this stranger knocked on the door of my house. I opened the door and he said, hey, Em, I want to show you something. No adjectives, no description, no explanation, just, hey, I want to show you something. I thought about it. I was a stranger living on the south coast of Iceland, and if I went missing, probably no one would come looking for me. But then again, it's Iceland, one of the safest places in the world. So I decided, okay, I can do this. So I grabbed a puffy jacket, hopped into his truck, and we drove out of the little tiny village I was living in, and we drove for a solid hour in complete silence. And then he pulled over on the side of the road. We hopped out, and he handed me some ice climbing gear, and he said, we're heading that way. We're heading to a glacier called Brattleboro. And so then we hiked towards this glacier in complete silence. And then we got to the glacier and we geared up, and then we hiked across this glacier for another 25 minutes in complete silence. And then we got to what I realized was our destination, this area of flat ice that had a deep bowl in it. And my host, he said, we're climbing down there. And so that's what we did. We climbed down there, we got to the bottom, he dug around in his pack and he handed me a thermos of coffee and a foam mat, and he said, we're gonna sit here, and we're gonna wait. And so that's what we did. We sat there for 20 minutes in complete silence. And then we sat there for another 20 minutes, and just about when I had reached my point of sitting on a cold glacier at night in winter with a stranger in Iceland, you've all been at that point, right? Just about when I'm at my point, it was dark 1 minute, and then the next minute, it wasn't. The northern lights, the aurora borealis, started to blaze. These yellows, these purples, these greens, they started to light up the sky. And this glacier we were sitting on, this bowl of ice, it started to pick up those lights. The whole glacier I was sitting on started to light up like a disco ball, like a chandelier. I felt like I was inside light. This was incredible. And actually, I will admit to you, I have no idea how long we sat there inside of a kaleidoscope, watching the ice hold the lights and watching the lights above. I have no idea how long we sat there until the clouds rolled in. And then we hiked off ice and we drove back to the village. But in the months and in the years since that happened, since I saw a glacier turn into a chandelier, there's a part of me that stands there with her jaw on the floor that was possible to see this glacier light up like this. This was possible. This is one of the things I love about working with ice. Glaciers, they make us reimagine what is possible. They make us reimagine what the future might hold. Today, we have some 5.8 million square miles of ice. We have over 400,000 glaciers and glacierettes scattered worldwide right now. And we have all different kinds of glaciers that we define in all sorts of ways. I'm going to show you just a couple of my favorites because I have to. I'm a glacier nerd, right? I have to show you some of these things. We have huge types of glaciers. We have ice sheets. These are glaciers that flow over 50,000 square kilometers unconstrained across the landscape. Today, we only have ice sheets in 2 places on this planet. Any guesses where some of those places might be? Any guesses? Greenland. Okay, we're there. We're good. Okay. Any guesses on where the second place might be? Antarctica. Perfect, right? We have only ice sheets today in Antarctica and Greenland. Okay, let me show you a different type.
And I guess Alaska.
But they're not in Alaska. But don't worry, we have different types. Check these out. We'll hold a minute. We'll get to that one. We have another type of glacier. We have valley glaciers. These are glaciers that sand down the Earth's crust and they carve out these incredibly distinctive U-shaped valleys. I love valley glaciers. And for Alaska, we also have tidewater glaciers. These are typically valley glaciers that terminate, they go all the way to the end into ocean water, which comparatively is pretty darn warm for a glacier. And so they do all this calving. We have tidewater glaciers all over the world. Okay, here's another one of my favorite glaciers. I love the ooh and the ah, yeah. Glaciologists are in the room, we've got this, right? This is a Piedmont Glacier. This is actually the Elephant Glacier in Greenland. Now, a Piedmont Glacier is just this ice that's been flowing over a lot of big mountain systems, and when it reaches a big plain, it flows out unconstrained in these big crescent shapes. If you've ever poured caramel or honey out onto a flat surface and it's kind of flowed out in a lobe shape, you're making your own homemade Piedmont Glacier, right? Okay, let me show you another favorite glacier. This is a glacierette. These are smaller ice masses. They're usually formed through maybe drifted or avalanched snow, or maybe broken down parts of recessed glaciers. Now, it's hard to get scale. How big is this glacierette that we're looking at? So you got to pull out a little bit. So this is this glacierette. This is the same glacierette. We've pulled out just a little bit. So glacierettes tend to be small glaciers that are usually about 1/10 of a square mile or so. We actually have about 200,000 glaciers and glacierettes out there glaciers and ice caps out there. And then we have about another 200,000 of these guys, which is why overall we keep focusing on the fact we have about 400,000 glaciers out here, right? You can see the footprints in the bottom part of this. This is giving you an idea of how small glacierettes are. Some of my colleagues, they don't actually include glacierettes in their global glacier counts. Some of my colleagues, they say that these are too small. They're too insignificant. They don't vote. But me, I look at these and I keep thinking it's critically important today to have nuanced and measured conversations about glaciers across all ranges of, sizes and diversities and geographies. But the more voices, glacier voices that we can get at the table, perhaps we're doing a much better job, right? Okay, let me show you my most favorite type of glacier. This is the last one on what I refer to as M's favorite glacier tour, okay? This is one of my favorites. Ooh. Okay, just to really amaze you. So you're looking at a rock glacier. Yeah. Does everybody see the glacier?
Yeah.
Okay, let me help you out for those of you that are not quite there yet, right? This is the glacier outlined, and you can actually look higher up in the image and see a second rock glacier that's up there, right? So we actually don't fully understand rock glaciers. They could either be rock debris that's maybe frozen together, or it could be glacier ice that's got covered and embedded with different bits of debris. Recent research is suggesting that our planet might have as many as 73,000 rock glaciers scattered across this planet. I hope you focus on that. It's an estimate. This huge environmental phenomenon, we don't know all that much about it. We certainly don't know how many are out there. So I want you to hold on to that. Because I hope one of you is thinking maybe you're going to be our world's next foremost rock glaciologist. It's a fun field, I tell you what, okay? So we have all these different types of glaciers out on this planet. We have such immense diversity in the types of glaciers that we have. This diversity is only paralleled by the diversity of where all of these glaciers are located. I want you to take a second and hold in your mind where you think there are glaciers on this planet. Okay, I'm a National Geographic Explorer. I'm gonna take you on an exploration of this world. I want to show you where there are some amazing glaciers. I hope to surprise you, right? So hold where you think glaciers are, and then let's see if I surprise you just a little bit. We have glaciers in Alaska. We have glaciers across the continental United States. We have glaciers in Canada. Hopefully no one is surprised so far. Okay? We have glaciers in Greenland. Lots and lots of tidewater glaciers which calve icebergs, more icebergs than I can count in a day. We have glaciers in Iceland. We have glaciers in Svalbard, in Jan Mayen. We have glaciers in Scandinavia. This is actually a small valley glacier that's tucked up here in Norway. We have glaciers in Central Europe. We have glaciers in Russia. We have glaciers in China. We have glaciers throughout northern and central Asia. This is a gathering of Sherpas at the Everest Base Camp. This is a gathering of people who their everyday job involves them working with ice. We have glaciers on the Indian subcontinent. This is actually the Gangotri Glacier that you're looking at. This is a glacier that's at the headwaters of the Holy Ganges River. Now, you might be squinting your eyes because we always think glaciers are white. But if you follow the water up the image, you're looking at what looks like a dirty tan chunks of ice, right? Glaciers are not always white. They can often be brown. Like this glacier in Pakistan on the this is the lower Baltoro Glacier that you're looking at here that's just completely covered in sediments. We have glaciers in Central Asia. We have glaciers in the Caucasus. We have glaciers in the Middle East. Yes, there are glaciers in the Middle East. This is a glacier in Turkey. You can see it up in the far corner of the image. Looks like a little lip on the snowfield there. We have glaciers in Africa. Yes, there are glaciers in Africa. We have glaciers in the tropics, glaciers all across South America, and we have glaciers in the southern Andes, in Patagonia, and of course we have glaciers in Antarctica and subantarctica and across New Zealand. So to hold all of that in your brain, right, what have we looked at? We've got glaciers in the Arctic, in Antarctica. We have glaciers in the Americas, North and South America, Central Europe, Africa. We have glaciers all over this planet, except poor Australia. They're missing out. They don't know what they're missing, right? Yeah. So everywhere these diverse glaciers are located, this is what I want you to hold on to here. Everywhere these diverse glaciers are located, they're located in inhabited and historic environments. Where there are glaciers, there are people. And the two have been influencing each other for the entirety of human history. But we actually don't know all that much about people in ice because for a long time we just did not think to look. It took a long time for us to start seeing this connection. I'll even admit it, it took me quite a long time to start realizing this connection between people and ice. I'll admit, I only ever realized how important this connection between people and ice was after an experience I had out on a glacier in Alaska that nearly killed me. This is bringing the message home for me, right? So years and years ago, I used to live in this small town in Alaska called Skagway. And Skagway, you have an inset image of the town of Skagway. Skagway is actually at the bottom of a fjord, a glacially carved out valley. And the surrounding coastal mountains are full of glacial ice in this area. Now, to understand this, you have to realize that for a glacier to grow anywhere on this planet, you essentially only need 3 things. Any guesses what 3 things you might need to grow your own glacier?
Snowfall?
Yes, okay, you are doing so much better than my undergraduates. Okay, we need 3 things, and we've already got one of them. We need snow. What are the other things? I can barely see you because of the lighting, so feel free just to shout it out.
Cold summers.
We need cold summers, but let's rephrase that. Take the word summer out. We need cold, right? We need cold temperatures. Perfect. So we've got snow and we've got cold temperatures. Who wants to guess what the third thing is?
Time.
Time. Yes. Okay, we are there. You're putting my undergraduates to shame right now, I'll tell you what, okay? Because usually this is an entire course to get them to go figure all 3 of these things out. Those are the 3 things that you need. Now, it doesn't work if you only have 1 of the things or 2 of the things. You need all 3 to work together to make a glacier. It snows, I'm told, a ton here in Vermont. Why is there not a big glacier surging all over Vermont? So what are we missing?
Cold summers.
Summers, that cold temperature, right? We're missing that cold temperature. What we need is all that snow to fall. We need all that snow to fall. We need that snow to start stacking up. And we need that cold temperature to allow that stacked up snow to stick around all winter. Stick around all spring and summer and fall and into the next year and the next year and the next century, so that all of that stacked up snow can turn into glacier ice. That's that simplified process. How that process actually occurs looks just like this, right? Here's how all those snowflakes turn into glacier ice. I teach a lot of children, so I use my hands. Imagine my hands are as snowflakes. Imagine 1 snowflake falling to the ground and a second snowflake falling on top of it. Now 1 snowflake, it doesn't weigh all that much. Anyone know how much 1 snowflake weighs? Half a raindrop, roughly, right? Okay. It's about 0.001 to about 0.02 grams per snowflake or such. So 1 snowflake, second snowflake, that doesn't actually have that big of an impact. But what happens when you start adding maybe 10 more, 100 more, 1,000,000 more snowflakes all stacked up? That poor sad snowflake at the bottom, it starts to lose its fingers. It'll start to break down. So all of the atmosphere, all the gases between the branches of your snowflake, they actually start to fall away. So you end up with snowflakes that used to look like this. They break down into firn and then into quite condensed glacier ice. That process, going from a full snowflake all the way down into glacier ice, that's a process that can take years, decades, depending on local conditions and place. And for centuries, Southeast Alaska had the perfect conditions to grow glaciers. So I moved to Skagway, Alaska to work with some of those glaciers. I wanted to work as a backcountry guide on the glaciers, as an EMT and a firefighter. I actually spent a lot of time volunteering with Skagway's search and rescue team, which is pictured here on the screen. This is our crackpot team. This is me in the middle in the bright orange puffy jacket. For as much as my career is based in cold places, actually not that much of a fan of the cold. So I'm always in all of these jackets, right?
The one red and orange?
I'm in the I guess in this resolution, I'm in the slightly orange and then oranger jacket right in the middle there. You find me?
Above the guy in blue?
Yes. With the nice snow tan that's in there. Yeah, okay. We'll just move on from that, right? So actually, on the day that this photo was taken, this is my search and rescue team, and we're out on, this is the Denver Glacier, and we were doing a training exercise. We were practicing what to do if somebody fell into a glacier, how to rescue them. So we did this training exercise all day long, and then at the end we decided, well, we should probably go have some fun, right? So we went over to an area of the glacier that had seracs. Think big chunks of ice that stick up like shark's fins from the surface of the glacier. And we went over to this area and we put up some ropes to do some ice climbing, have a wee bit of fun now, okay? But at the base of this serac was a crevasse, a crack in the surface ice. And it was full of the clearest, bluest water that you have ever seen. And me, I stood right on up to the edge of this crevasse. And I was wearing my heavy winter gear and a full climbing rack and a helmet and crampons. And when the person who I was belaying, so the person who I was connected to by rope, who was up on that shark's fin, when that person slipped and fell, my anchor failed. So I was yanked right on up off my feet, and I was dropped right into this crevasse. Raise your hand. How many people in the room think I lived? Good, good. We're doing good, right? Who was I out there on this glacier with? My search and rescue team. They were so excited. Here was a live rescue. We had just practiced this all day long. They were on it. Quicker than a blink of an eye. They had me fished right on out of that crevasse, stripped of wet gear, re-warming in a sleeping bag, and I'm standing here fully alive to tell you this story. But I'm not telling you this story because we all love adventure stories, even though that's probably somewhere in there. I am telling you this story because of what happened after. After, when I helicoptered back down into Skagway, and everybody in my town, they all wanted to know, what was it like to get rescued by your own search and rescue team? And I told them my glacier story. But after I told them my glacier story, they started to tell me their glacier story. They started to tell me their experiences with glaciers, of glaciers growing and glaciers retreating and glaciers with trees growing on them. They started to tell me all these different stories, different ways they were interacting with ice. Stories that showed ice meant something to them. How, like rivers and forests and oceans, glaciers gave the people of my town of Skagway a sense of identity, a sense of place, a sense of who they were and where they had been. And for me, listening to these stories over and over again, I started to realize that there was this significant knowledge disparity in how we scientists so far had been thinking about glaciers. That what we had been focusing on didn't actually match what was happening on the ground. That our picture of glaciers was far from complete, especially today. Because today glaciers are widely narrated as one of the most visible manifestations of global climatic changes. Likely everyone in this room today, you are somewhat familiar with this story. We see iterations of it in film and TV and social media all over the place. Stories of climate change are full of image after image of glaciers materially retreating. Evidence that yes, climatic changes are happening, and yes, human beings are transforming Earth's systems. But what does that actually mean? We just did a world tour. You now know glaciers are all over the world. So how does glacier change impact people all over the world? People in the States, people in the Arctic, in Europe, in China, people who don't have glaciers in their backyard. Now, these are not easy, cut and dry answers to questions like this, but it doesn't make them any less important. And given the climatic changes that are occurring on our planet, trying to understand what's happening with people and ice, this is growing in importance today. And teasing this stuff apart, this is what I spend my entire career doing as a scientist. Today, half of my research focuses on the physical aspects of ice, but really half, and now it seems to be more and more, my work focuses on the people who live with glaciers. I'm going to give you a localized example just so that you kind of can travel with me a little bit here. For years, I've been working with glaciers on the south coast of Iceland. Iceland has about 400 glaciers spread across the whole island. There's about 269 or so of them, of these glaciers that are individually named. Glaciers here, like glaciers worldwide, are melting at rates we have never before seen. And glaciers here, like glaciers worldwide, are exceptionally diverse. And each one of these glaciers fluctuates in multitudes of complex ways to local, regional, and environmental dynamics. Some local glaciology models predict that these particular glaciers are going to lose about 25 to 35% of present volume over the next 50 years, largely as a result of increasing climatic changes, specifically increasing air temperatures, right? But each Icelandic glacier reacts to the stress of rising air temperatures differently. Just as no two people in this room are going to react to the same stress in the same way, neither ever would two glaciers. No two people in this room are going to react to colder temperature, warmer temperature, heartbreak, right? The same way. Neither ever would two glaciers. Let me show you. I'm going to give you 3 examples. This is the Icelandic glacier, Hafrsjökull. Anyone want to try it? Hafrsjökull. I support you 100%. I do think it's amazing. And this is the Icelandic glacier, Hafrsjökull. And between the years 1890 and 2010, this glacier recessed. It actually shrank about 2.5 miles. 2.5 miles of its physical body dissolved away into the ocean. Now the glacier right next to it Skálafellsjökull. Yeah. This glacier between that same time set, 1890 and 2010, this glacier recessed only 1.2 miles. Quite different than its neighboring glacier. Let's look, and a third one right next to it. This is the glacier Heinabergsjökull. Want to give it a go? Heinabergsjökull? If you're ever in Iceland, you're completely fine to identify 3 glaciers. It's the important thing that you can be able to do, right? Okay? This glacier between that same time set, 1890 and 2010, it recessed only 0.2 miles, so much less than the other two glaciers. But actually, if you look at the image, you can see the valley walls that once cradled this glacier. Instead of the tip, the edge, the terminus of this glacier is shrinking back. Instead, for this particular glacier, it just got thinner and thinner and thinner. It has exceptionally high rates of downwasting. It is the same stress, right? Increasing air temperatures. But we have three glaciers, same stress, all responding differently, just like all of us respond differently to different stresses. Now, where these three glaciers are located is along this 125-mile narrow stretch of sparsely inhabited coastline on the south coast of Iceland, where this little strip of land, it's kind of viced between the North Atlantic Ocean to the south and Vatnajökull, this big ice cap to the north. Here, all of the glaciers that are located along this strip of land, they are all responding to climatic stresses. And these responses, these variety of responses, are actually influencing the complex relationships, the complex connections between people and ice in this area. Take that glacier I talked about in the very beginning of this lecture, that glacier Brattleboro, the one I saw turn into a chandelier. This is actually a picture of Brattleboro. And if you can look halfway down this image about, you can see a bridge where people are walking across here. So as this glacier has recessed, access to the ice has gotten tricky. I used to be able to walk from land to this glacier. And then the glacier moved back and it sprouted a large lake, and then I had to take Zodiac boats to get closer to it. And now locals have built this bridge so that we can get across the water here and then get out onto the ice. Now, I've kept coming back to this glacier, not only over the years to monitor its unique recession patterns, but also to see how this glacier connects to the larger community. Where the bridge is in this image, look at this place. Where the bridge is in this image, this place, over 1,000 years ago when Norse settlers first settled Iceland, right where this bridge is, this place used to be lush birch forest and thick green meadow. Those Norse settlers who came right to where this bridge is, they looked around, they thought they hit jackpot. They immediately raised farms, they raised families, they raised futures right here. This is what I think about when I walk around this whole area of Brattleboro. How green, how livable it all used to be. That is until around the 1600s or so. When the planet's climate changed, it started to cool with the Little Ice Age. And up valley from this area, this glacier, Brattleboro, it started to respond to the stress of cooler temperatures. It started to respond by growing bigger, by advancing, by heading down valley to those farms and those families and those futures. Glaciers don't move consistently, all in or all back. Glaciers move maybe 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 5 steps forward. They're very, very inconsistent. And this glacier, Brattleboro, it started to move forward. A couple steps forward, maybe a couple back, a couple more forward, causing the people who lived in front of this glacier, like where you can see the farmhouse in the center of this image, causing the people who lived here to every day step out of their farmhouse, look behind them at that glacier that was coming to them, and they had to make a decision that day. Is the glacier advancing or is it not? Is it getting closer or is it not? These people who lived in front of this glacier, every day they had to make a decision. Do they go or do they stay? A decision actually rather similar to the decision thousands and thousands of people make today, who stand on the edge of the Mediterranean, who stand on the edge of the Rio Grande, who look behind themselves at changing environments and make a decision today. Do you go or do you stay? Here, this glacier just kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger and people fled before it because they could not live there anymore. This ice actually grew so big that it pressed the island down. The physical crust of the island was pushed down. It sank. And the North Atlantic Ocean, it rushed in and it flooded those once safe fishing harbors that people had used for hundreds of years. Everything sank and was covered with ice. But fast forward in time. Fast forward in time to the 1800s, right? The climate shifted again as the little ice age ended, and this glacier started to respond to the stress of warming temperatures. Started to respond by taking one step forward and two steps back. And Icelanders, they saw this. They saw this glacier getting smaller, so they started to move back into this area. They started to moor their fishing boats in those harbors that started to rise out of the ocean as the land responded to the ice melting away. But this time, these people, they built their houses on high points, on the small little hills in this area. And every day they went outside and they looked at the ice because they knew that the ice would come forward again. It always had before. But fast forward to today. Another century gone, and this glacier has not behaved at all like it used to. Climatic conditions have pushed this glacier, Brattleboro, into a backward march towards gone, dissolving quicker than glaciers have ever dissolved in human history before. And for me, I have sat across countless kitchen tables, drinking coffee so black you could chew it. And I have listened to Icelanders tell me that they fear glacier recession. They fear that the ice in this area is going to disappear all the way down to the last snowflake. And they ask me, can Icelanders still be Icelandic in Iceland with no ice? Glaciers and people are connected through senses of identity. Now, I've walked across so many farms in this area with local people who tell me that they are grateful that the ice is getting smaller, because that means that glaciers can no longer surge forward. They can no longer destroy those farms and those families and those futures like they did for hundreds and hundreds of years before. People here, they tell me there might be safety now. Glaciers and people, they get connected through perceptions of safety. I've had people lay bank statements down on their dining room tables and explain to me that as glaciers melt, they melt money. Millions of tourists are coming to Iceland today to see the glaciers before they're gone, what my colleagues call last chance tourism. And bank accounts here in this area are filling up as Icelanders are starting glacier tourism companies on Brattleboro. They're opening restaurants and hotels and taking their whole family on vacations to Tenerife. And they tell me they finally have found economic stability. So glaciers and people here, they connect through senses of economic stability. But then again, I've been out on boats listening to fishermen tell me that they fear for this whole region because they know economic instability is coming, because the glaciers are melting and the land keeps rising. Isostatic rebound, glacier rebound. The land keeps rising, causing the very best fishing harbor on the south coast to slowly become too shallow, too full of sediments, and boats, they're struggling to enter and exit this harbor, and this can't go on much longer. And we see that people and ice are connected through economic instability. So I'll tell you, for years I've been walking across this glacier with colleagues, with friends and with locals. And just like all of us are trying to make sense of the changes we see in our backyards, so too are these people. That's, for me, one of the things that are so powerful about glaciers. Glaciers make visible things that can seem abstract, like climatic changes, like human history, like stories, like what stories we're all a part of, what stories we act on, what stories we don't act on. This glacier, Brattleboro, this glacier is one glacier out of 400 glaciers in Iceland, 1 glacier out of 400,000 glaciers and glacierets scattered across this planet. There are so many stories, and we're just beginning to see them. Now, I admit it, you might not all have a glacier in your backyard. Not all of you might tie your economic stability, instability, identity, sense of value to this stuff. Your heart might not beat like mine when you see huge ice systems. But I want you to understand that you are connected to glaciers. Think about every one of the glaciers you've seen in this presentation. Every one of these glaciers is melting. Where do you think all that melt is going? Yes, into our oceans. But this has massive impacts that maybe aren't so obvious. So let me explain this to you. I want you to imagine for 1 minute in your mind a bank. Now, I'm told if you want to save money, not spend it, you're supposed to put all your money in this thing, right? All your money's supposed to go in the bank. And then that money can't circulate around. Now, if you're me and you take the money out of the bank, you immediately spend it on books and cats and all of these other things, right? So then your money circulates around, right? Now, glaciers, they're actually a lot like this. They're a lot like a bank for our planet. But instead of holding all of our money, what these things do is they hold all of our water. What we know is this. We have a finite amount of water on this planet. And that water, as 3rd grade science class taught us, right? That water circulates around in our hydrological cycle. In the most simplest of terms, we've got water that moves around. It evaporates potentially out of the ocean. It travels around in our atmosphere. It interacts with different temperatures and might be deposited again as rain or snow or hail, moves through a river back out of the ocean. That system continues. There should be some head nodding. There should be similar and kind of familiar to everybody, right? We've got this. This is a process that happens on this planet. But glaciers, they shift that process. They actually shift our planetary water cycle. Glaciers, they actually take water out of our planet's hydrological system. All those snowflakes, they get taken out of the system, processed into glacier ice, and put in the savings account over there. So what we know is that when the planet is colder, it is drier because there is less water in the hydrological system. It's all in that savings account in the glacier bank. But when the planet is warmer, it is wetter because there is more water that is being released into that hydrological system. There's very little in the savings account in the glacier bank, right? Today, what we see is that the glacier bank, it's wide open. It's raining money. It's raining snowflakes. And what happens when suddenly a system has a lot of money circulating around in it? What happens to that economy? What happens to that hydrological cycle, right? It gets stimulated. And that's what we see today. Same with our world's water cycle. More water in the cycle does not mean just sea level rise. More water in the cycle means more fuel, more weather, more water. So whatever existing weather you might have in a place gets bigger. We end up seeing bigger rain events, bigger snow events, bigger hurricanes, bigger droughts, bigger whatever weather, wherever you are. So if you think on that, next time it rains, go stand outside. I want you to tilt your head back, and I want you to let that rain fall on you, and I want you to think about something. Long ago, somewhere on this planet, we saw a bunch of those places, maybe somewhere in Africa, maybe somewhere in China, in Russia, in Antarctica, in Arctic, somewhere, it was snowing. And that snow fell down, and it processed into glacier ice, and over large time, that snow went through into glacier ice, moved through that glacier, and slowly started to melt, depositing those snowflakes as water into our world's hydrocycle. And that water moved through that hydrocycle into our atmosphere, and it came delivered to you as rain that day. Reminders that you are connected wherever you live on this planet, to glaciers wherever they are on this planet, just like you're connected to our forests and our deserts, our rivers and our oceans and our valleys. That connection between you and me and ice, that connection is so critical to understand. Here's where this gets really interesting if you focus on that connection and you start wondering about the future. What the science is telling us is that today it is possible to slow this unprecedented rate of glacier melt. It is possible to slow glacier melt. It is possible to get that stress of temperatures down. It is possible for our glaciers to grow back. It is possible. That's worth repeating to you, that our ice, which is today melting at unprecedented rates, can grow back. It is possible. All we need is snow and cold temperatures and time. We have snow. There's plenty of fuel in our hydro system. We can make tons of snow. We have the ability to bring our temperatures down. We have great technology, and finally, we are beginning to have the social momentum possible. But that time thing, that's the tricky bit of the three things you need, that time. Because glaciers, we all know it, they're slow. They need a lot of time. It is likely that our ice can grow back, but it is likely that our ice cannot grow back in my lifetime, in your lifetime, in likely our children's lifetime. But our ice can grow back. We know what the mechanisms are, we know what the problems are, we know what the solutions are, and for me, I think about that a lot, because for me, that is just enough to allow a little hope to creep in. Just enough hope creeps in that it makes me no longer interested in those conversations about no hope, or those conversations about is it happening or is it not happening, those conversations about all the obstacles in our way. To me, I'm holding on to that little bit of hope, and that makes me not have enough time for all those other conversations. I don't have enough time for that, and frankly, neither do you. I'm standing up here telling you about something I love. I'm fighting every day to make sure that glaciers have a future. And I'm wide-eyed to the fact that I'm fighting for something. I am fighting for results that I am never going to witness. But that doesn't make this fight any less important. Because just like every person in this room, I am in this for the long fight. Just like every person in this room, I am acutely aware of how powerful we are when we stand together, when we work together, when we fight together. And here's what I know. Ice influences us just as much as we influence ice. And what that means is that what happens to the ice happens to us. So that tells me that all of us in this room, all of us on this planet, and all of our amazing magical ice, all of us are very much worth fighting for. Thank you so much for your time. Okay, please. Yes, of course.
I was wondering how much you said each of them went back. I taking notes. Didn't start writing until after you.
So you were looking for metrics. Don't put too much faith in those metrics because we have 1890 to 2010, and that is an important data set because that's when we've been collecting data, right? That's why we have that. So you have one glacier, Hafelsjökull, that has been recessing in that time period, 2.48 miles. 1.2 miles for Skálafellsjökull, yes, I remember, and 0.2 for Hafnarfjall. Oh, Hindenburgsjökull. Got them?
Yes.
You good?
Yeah.
Perfect. You were waving at me a minute ago. Was that your
I thought you
question?
were touching. No, I actually had a question about that exact thing. You talked
Go
about
on.
data being started to gather in 1890. I was just wondering, is there any way to look further back, like works in geological features or something to gather numeric data, or can you only speculate based on the counts that you have?
That is such a good question. So the 1890 for this specific location is just because that's when we started pulling our data, right?
Right.
But we can take a core. We can actually drill into a glacier and we can pull things out. I want you to imagine my hands are two snowflakes, right? When snowflakes are falling, they're collecting the atmosphere. They're collecting anything in the library that's in the air as those snowflakes fall down. Things like aerosols, things like pollen, right? Different gases. It's stuck between the snowflakes, they fall down and that thing gets trapped. And why that's important is because we can then go into that glacier, we can pull a core out and we can say, hey glacier, otherwise known as Better Google, what was the planet like 100 years ago? What was the planet like several hundred years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago? That's the data that we can get from our planetary libraries that are glaciers. And there's amazing types of data that you can get from it. We can reconstruct environments from that. But our libraries are melting. This is part of why we need to start advocating for our ice, because our libraries are melting. Imagine if tomorrow you try to go open your computer and you cannot Google anymore. Okay? There'd be a lot of panic. But think of all the information that we would lose. And to me, that's one of the things that are at stake. So great question, okay?
Just to clarify, I was curious. Just to clarify, you're able to look into the past, but you're not actually able to look at what the glacier was like in the past.
Well, we can do that, but that tends to be, we're starting to look in the environments around. So we might be looking under a glacier surrounding landscapes. We're able to reconstruct where ice used to be. For instance, anyone been to Long Island? Right?
Yes.
Cape Cod, we can look into the landscape there and we can reconstruct what glaciers were doing when. It's not a perfect record, because glaciers, when they move over a landscape, tend to erase all evidence that was before them, right? So it's spotty, but we do our best. Good question. Yeah?
So, I should do. The first one is, were there glaciers in the past that already got melted?
Run that one by me one more time.
Were there more glaciers in the past that already melted? That's what-
So there have been very large planetary glaciations where we've had a lot more ice. There have been times when we have had less ice. What we know from our ice core data, from our tree data, from all different kinds of data, is that it is very natural for glaciers to oscillate, to have a lot of ice and a little bit of ice. But what is unnatural that we know today is the rate of loss that we're experiencing today. We have seen no data to tell us this has ever happened before. It is natural for glaciers to grow bigger. It is natural for glaciers to melt. But the rate of loss we're experiencing today is unnatural. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Perfect.
But I was another question, please. Like, how did you start working for National Geographic? Like, you told us story how you were writing and you finally got a response to writing emails. So how did you officially get hired finally?
Well, I think the man that's in charge of all of that might be sitting 2 rows behind you, and you could probably go have that conversation with him. But I'll tell you another story. Not only did I get to work with, I got to work as an employee for the National Geographic, but several years after that, I got an email one day, and the email title said, "Do not delete." And then you open the email, and it says, first thing, "Dear M. Jackson, this is not a scam. Please call this number. You've been named a National Geographic Explorer." And then, of course, you call that number, and your life changes.
Yeah, I was asking about the reason there was no response. I was asking like how about the story of how did you officially get hired. That's what I was asking.
Well, I actually don't know why they chose me and hired me.
I'm not asking why. I'm just asking how. I was asking how.
Oh, the how of it. The how of it. What do you mean?
I could add to that if you want.
I feel like the man who could really answer that
I was curious
question.
about the story.
I think her story is a story of persistence and tenacity and intelligence and dedication.
I love that answer. Let's, if you are really curious about this, let's talk a little bit more after that. Let's see if we've got other questions. Sir, no, you're doing great. Yeah.
You suggested the method that we as a population can return this planet to cold. Can you flesh that out for us?
Yeah, so we have the possibility of having a world with healthy glaciers. What does healthy glaciers mean? It's glaciers that melt, it's glaciers that grow. It's this business of what we have evidence telling us that's what's possible, that's what's natural for glaciers. We have evidence of human habitation across Europe and a lot of places in the Arctic where people live successfully with glaciers that naturally grew forward and advanced, glaciers that naturally recessed. That type of equilibrium. That equilibrium is not what we live in today. So is there a target temperature that we want to move back to that's perfect for all glaciers? I'm going to leave that for other people to argue. But can we live in a world where ice is going to, at natural rates, recess or advance? Can we live in that world? I think we could. How do we get to that from where we are today? You know, there's a lot of conversation that there's some 7.5 billion people on this planet. And as I travel around, as I do all the things that I do, I can't help but interact with people and start recognizing that we've got about 7.5 billion potential solutions to meet climatic changes. I am inspired by so many of the people I get to meet. And a lot of people talk about different solutions, and I'm certainly not going to stand up here and tell you all 7.5. But it does tend to seem like, how do we get to that place where glaciers could be in equilibrium? One of the very, 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 very first things that you got to do is vote. And you have to have some type of political action that tends to put people in power who tend to put our environment before any kind of party affiliation. That's one thing. A second thing that you can really start thinking about doing is how you consume, what food you eat. Potentially, are we talking about a vegetarian diet versus meat? We have really good data that tells us that might be one good way to move forward. Potentially consuming things that have less plastic on them, that might be one way. But really, what I keep coming back to, probably the very best thing that we can do is, I'm standing up here telling you about glaciers because I love them. That doesn't mean all of you have to be glaciologists. But what I would ask of you is that you do spend some time and find your glacier. You've got to find the thing that you're willing to be an advocate for. Because to me, I keep thinking that 7.5 billion voices advocating for their thing, their glacier and their river and their forest and their local park and their equity and all their different things that we could advocate for. The minute you unplug and stop caring, the minute we're done. So I think we can return to an equitable planet. We can turn to a place where glaciers are part of the living system we're going to be a part of. But it's a dark fight that we're in, and I think we're going to meet it. Yeah.
I have a question about cores.
Yeah.
I pull out a core.
Yeah.
I want to know what it was like 1,000 years ago. How do I know where to go on that core?
Well, you've stepped in it first. Isn't that the great glacier? I mean, in the whole honesty, you need to be lucky, because so much money goes to the oldest ice where we're pulling cores. We're not pulling cores from Iceland. That ice moves too quick, right? We need to go to places where the ice is moving very, very slow. Greenland, but usually Antarctica gives us some of the best data. So you got to work together with a lot of scientists at a lot of institutions. You got to write a lot of grants, and you go there, and then you got to hope your equipment holds, and then you pull your core out, and then you all have to have a card match about what section you get and what section your buddies get, and you cut that up, and you're hoping that your section might be the area that you're going to focus on. Is it going to give you 1,000-year-old data or several thousand years more, et cetera? You have to work together. It's hard. Just to be very specific about your question, to pinpoint if you're looking at a specific time set, a specific year, I need to know what the climate was like in 871. Can I pull a core and pinpoint that? That's really difficult to do. Not impossible, but it requires quite a bit of procedure. Yeah?
When glaciers form, if all that compression of the ice, would that in turn generate heat that would cause it to melt?
You are on your way to being a glaciologist. This idea that glaciers might generate heat, what is that? Glaciers are cold. We've all stuck our hands in a freezer, right? Oh, perfect. Yes, some glaciers, depending, every glacier is different and different places are different, right? But we do have glaciers that, because of the way they are structured, they actually have large lakes underneath them because they're helping to insulate, they're helping to move. There's all these different processes. It gets a little bit,
That's how glaciers move. They're just consistently melting on the bottom, just downhill as they melt.
That's definitely in the right direction. But the mechanics for this might be a little bit outside of this conversation, but we can certainly break into what happens with the thermal dynamics of glaciers. But I think you might have a fellow glacier nerd. Yeah.
So, just like hearing your story about glaciers, how did you stay with that for so long, and how did that, how did you build up the tenacity to stay with a subject such as glaciers? Because glaciers are one of the most unique things on Earth. They move and change and stuff. How did you stay with that topic for as long as you did?
And as long as I will, for the rest of my life. The big one is a part of who I am. You know, I lived very, very rurally. I grew up very, very poor, and I didn't think I was very smart. I'd never met another scientist, let alone a female scientist. I didn't ever know that science was an option or a career potential for me. I moved to Skagway, Alaska, and my career, I knew what I was going to do. I was going to be a backcountry guide, and I was going to be a medic and a firefighter. I knew those things. I felt safe there. I struggled to finish even high school. I have a community college degree because I didn't stay in high school, right? I knew that all of these obstacles were too big for me to in any way move forward. But the thing is when I started working on all that ice, I started to get intrigued. And I started to wonder, and I started to ask the people around me, why is this glacier doing this? Why is it different than the Denver Glacier? And what is going on with the Chilkat Glacier? It has trees growing on it. I started to ask all these questions, and the people around me did not have the answers. And so I kept asking, and I kept asking. At some point, one person looked at me and said, why don't you answer your own question? And I said, I cannot do that. That's not possible. But then it grabbed me, and then I started to. And then I started to answer another question and another question. And I started to surround myself with people who said I was smart enough. And I started to surround myself with people who said, these are important and valid questions you're asking. Have you met this person? Have you met this person? I was so lucky to be surrounded with people who believed in me and supported me. And that is why I continue to work with glaciers today. And that is why I will work with glaciers for the rest of my life.
So you found your passion in glaciers?
Me and glaciers were besties forever. Excellent question. One more question. Who's burning for one more question? Go for it.
Just as people told you stories and you kind of ignite the storytellers and people about glaciers, do you think glaciers are also telling their own stories? And if so, how do you think they're doing that?
Glaciers are certainly telling their own stories. Glaciers have been living with people and with environments for a very long time. I think the more important thing is for us to learn to read and understand and hear those stories that they have and listen. Glaciers have a lot to teach us. I spent a lot of time with a handful of glaciers in Iceland and Alaska and Antarctica. But there are 400,000 glaciers and glacierettes out there. We have not even begun to scratch the surface. So I hope maybe you might join me. Okay? Thank you all so much for your time. I'm here if you have any questions.